Welcome to the Mansard Room, land of good food and nice views of the city. We're going to be back here again at the end of the day for the Map Mixer reception, so please join us for drinks and appetizers at 5:45. Meanwhile, my job is to keep us moving in this rushed agenda. We apologize for all of that. We're trying to cram as much as we can for you all into one day. So please, if you haven't gotten food, please grab food, find a place to sit or stand, and I will talk while you chew. I want to echo Cameron's thanks to all of you for being here. I want to thank our sponsors, in particular our lead sponsor, the Kettering Foundation. In just a minute, we'll be hearing from Sharon Davies, the president of Kettering. Kettering is one of the three pillar organizations supporting this event, as you know. A second is NCOC. I want to thank Cameron, my friend Cameron, and his colleagues, particularly Stacy Meadows and Amy Howell, for making this happen and for partnering with us, a third pillar, the National Civic League, to make this work, and my colleagues Doug Linkart and Rebecca Trout in particular. So Cameron started us off this morning with this theme of the future of citizenship. And we've already heard about several types of democracy innovation that could be part of that future. Innovations in investing in democracy, measuring democracy, civic learning. We're going to be hearing this afternoon about innovations in journalism, and in digital engagement, and safeguarding elections, citizen assemblies. You saw that healthy democracy map where we're trying to show geographically where all this work is happening and how it's connected. So the daunting challenge that we face, and it is daunting, is how do we move from these exciting, ephemeral democracy innovations to structural changes in democracy that we need. It is a daunting challenge, and we've done it before. When Valerie kicked us off this morning, she talked about the early days of the National Civic League, that period from 1900 to 1920, when you had these waves of democracy innovation that culminated in these enormous structural changes to how we do democracy today. All kinds of things started in that era. The ballot initiative and referendum process, the Federal Reserve, the Model City Charter. We had whole new public-facing professions like social work, planning, city management, policing, that either were born or took their present form more or less in that era. All of these things emerged in response to threats. The threats of the day, like corruption, illiteracy, inequity. And they, in the kind of the redesign of democracy that happened in that period, they kind of elevated expert intelligence and the role of elected officials to deal with those threats. The innovations that we see today, that we personify in this room, have more to do, most of them, with collective intelligence, in support of and alongside expert intelligence. If you saw the essay series that we released leading up to the conference, that very first essay was essentially a big, enormous chart trying to list all the democracy innovations of the last 20 years and some of the people who were involved in each of them. Two friends of mine who took a look at that draft looked at it and said, "Matt, what are you trying to write now?" But what we were trying to do is kind of show the diversity of these things. We had, deliberative processes on race and equity in the 90s. We had digital tools in the 2000s. We had waves of innovation that started in other countries, like participatory budgeting. One of our challenges now is that often those waves are really disconnected. They're not supporting each other. And you see that also at the local level. I saw it at the All America Cities Award this year. All America Cities is an award process the National Civic League has been running for 75 years now. It's really an amazing event. What you have at that event are 20 cities competing to be named All America Cities. Each of those cities brings a team of between 20 and 60 people. Some of them are actually here in this room. The teams are tremendously diverse. You've got high school students, you've got senior citizens, you've got business leaders, you've got elected officials. And they're all competing in their competitions. They are talking about the civic projects and the data related to their accomplishments. And they're also presenting them in ways that also involve music and dance routines and comedy sketches. It's kind of like this, but with samba. I met this year at All America Cities Miss Black San Antonio, the head librarian of Redwood City, California, the major general in charge of Fort Liberty in North Carolina, the world's largest military base. And it's really exciting to see these kind of diverse sets of people who have found solutions to the threats and the problems they face in their communities. It's also frustrating because I could tell that they haven't heard of many of the innovations that are present in this room. They don't know about many of the tools, strategies, innovations that you all offer, whether you're working in other communities or at the national level. And so part of what we need to be doing is connecting better our communities of innovators locally, nationally, and at the state level, which is incredibly important. We're going to be hearing more about that in this next panel. So part of the threats that we're dealing with are threats related to technology and AI. And I think the biggest single threat posed by AI is the fact that we collectively don't understand it well enough. We don't know how to direct it. We aren't yet setting the terms for it, as was talked about in the first panel today, setting the terms for it in ways that would uphold equality, liberty, fairness, all the things that we want. And that's actually why Cameron's vision for NCOC's future is so important, of an organization that will be a facilitator, convener, and safeguard of civic data. So some of the other threats that we're dealing with are basically related to the fact that those early 20th century reforms are showing their age. Things like ballot initiative and referendum process, and also the open public meeting. Those are things that are, in most cases, not working in ways that are actually satisfactory either to citizens or officials or staff. And so part of the thing is actually trying to do something about that. One of the panels this afternoon, actually, and it's moderated by Clarence Anthony from the National League of Cities, will feature elected officials who are working to change their local public meetings and bring them into the 21st century. That is actually work that's supported by the AAA ICDR Foundation. So we have all these threats. We have these waves of innovation. And probably the importance of those changing those kind of official interactions is that often, too many times, basically, they're actually damaging public trust. Whenever people have bad experiences either with voting or with public meetings or other interactions with the government, it damages their trust, and people have fewer and fewer successful, happy experiences with their democracy. Those are weaknesses that authoritarians can and do exploit. I got a good picture of this at the Congressional Exchange that we organized a year ago. We had members of Congress talking to legislators from Brazil, Argentina, Germany, and the EU, talking about various democracy innovations, citizens' assemblies in Germany, the open law portal in Argentina, e-Cidadania in Brazil. But I could tell that the members of Congress weren't really understanding the true significance of these activities. And finally, Senator Humberto Costa from Brazil said, you know, the reason why we haven't had a coup, and this was right after the Brazilian election last fall and Bolsonaro trying to mount a coup, he said the reason why we haven't had a successful coup is that so many Brazilians have a daily positive experience of democracy in their lives, and they know what they're defending. In America, too, we need to know what we're defending. And as we kind of face these threats, as we are thinking about these challenges that we face, thinking about how to turn these waves of innovation to structural reforms, we have to remember that this is, in fact, a job for our collective intelligence. ChatGPT has wondrous powers, superhuman powers, of articulating, categorizing, summarizing stuff. ChatGPT will not write the next chapter of democracy for us. We have to do that. You can applaud for that. So that's also why it's exciting to introduce this next panel, because under the new leadership of Sharon Davies, the Kettering Foundation has taken on this exciting new role of learning from, supporting, and championing structural reforms to democracy, and that will respond to the threats that we face. So let me invite them up. Actually, before I do that, let me say a little bit more about Sharon, because I'm introducing her. Sharon Davies is the president and CEO of Kettering. Her experiences are both in academic and non-academic environments. Before coming to Kettering, she was the provost of Spelman College in Atlanta. Before that, she was the vice provost for diversity and equity, and also chief diversity officer at The Ohio State University. I'm from Michigan, so I stumble over it. The Ohio State. Yeah. Yeah, I won't rub it in. But, Sharon was also on the faculty of the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State for 22 years. She was the Charles Williams Chair in Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and the director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. She was also, before that, a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. So please take it away, Sharon.
Okay. you. Hi. Hello, and thank you, everybody. And I'm welcoming up to the stand stage two extraordinary citizens of the state of Ohio, and most recently have agreed to serve as senior fellows for the Kettering Foundation. I'm going to jump right in and introduce to you former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, Maureen O'Connor. Also served in younger days as a court of pleas judge, and also the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Ohio. Also with me is David Pepper, former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, an educator, an elections law expert, and an author of books like Laboratories of Autocracy, which if you haven't seen, you really need to think hard about what's happening in our states today, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We have a hard stop, so I'm going to just jump right in, but ask you all to welcome these two extraordinary panelists today. Okay, and I'm going to start with you, David, because a lot has been happening in the state of Ohio that the two of you are involved in. And one of them was national news. Most recently over the summer when the state legislature decided to hold the special election, August 8th, to decide whether or not citizens of the state of Ohio should have to have more than a majority of votes in order to pass a citizen-led ballot initiative. Can you give us a little rundown of what that was all about, how it came about, and why it was so significant?
Sure. Well, thank you for having us. Thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversations I've witnessed earlier today. So thank you for all of you, the work you're doing to support and lift our democracy at a very perilous time. And unfortunately, we've been living that battle up close in Ohio. And that August referendum was in particular the most direct attack on democracy, I think, at least I've ever seen. Basically, what's happening in a lot of these states, and you'll know my view of the states that are doing things wrong when you see the title of a book called Laboratories of Autocracy. That's about states and state houses. But what they sense is that a lot of their views in their very gerrymandered world are unpopular. And they know this. And rather than accommodating that in terms of what they do, whether it's to gerrymander more or suppress votes or something else, whatever they can do to change the rules to lock in a viewpoint they know is actually not popular, they will do. And this sounds controversial when I say it. My dad used to say, David, are you really sure you want to be saying all this? And I said, yeah, I do. Well, they did us all a favor with this thing in August because it was literally the vehicle of creating minority rule in the state of Ohio, which means they can win on a statewide issue at only 41%. That was their goal. And that was, in the end, and there are only, I think, 19 states have this, but one of the great safety valves of the state of Ohio is that if the citizens are sufficiently unhappy, they can go to the ballot. We've had that for more than a century, thanks to reformers of the past, and that's a threat if you know that you're passing law after law that's unpopular. So this was a direct end run trying to diminish the people in our democracy. And the good news is that, and there's a lot of lessons here, but a multi-party coalition, a nonpartisan coalition really, came together and stopped it. And it was an enormous victory. It was supposed to be an 8% turnout. It was almost a turnout at a midterm level. And blue counties voted no, red counties voted no, moderate counties voted no. Ohio came together and stopped this very vicious attack on democracy. So it's a good story in the end, but a very sort of perilous year that took us to get to that victory.
Yeah, and the importance of it became clear in November, in the November election. So just to remind the room, this is a room that believes in the important role of citizens in a democracy. Not just an important role, but an obligation of citizens to be engaged in a democratic society. And that was, in fact, what the citizens of Ohio were attempting to do, right? I mean, this is one of the states that did, as David said, have a possibility of a citizen-led ballot measure. Not all states do, and in fact, I think only a very small minority of states do. But the citizens of Ohio wanted to utilize that power because of what had happened in the Dobbs decision on the United States Supreme Court, which suggested that states were the right place for decisions on reproductive freedom and access to abortion. And so once that decision was made, the Ohio citizens began to organize because it became clear that members of the state legislature were out of touch with what the majority of Ohio citizens wanted to do on the question of abortion. It could be that question, it could be gun control that we're talking about, it could be any number of things. But when citizens think that their state legislature is being unresponsive to them, this is one thing that they could do, at least in the state of Ohio. So what happened in that special election was critically important, and then it turned out to be even more important just a couple of weeks ago, right?
It sure did, yeah. And in the number, it was an absolutely overwhelming victory for the reproductive freedom side. Something like 57, 43, 24 counties, I think 16 or 17 counties that voted for Trump voted for reproductive freedom. If they had won in August, that still would have been a loss. Mm-hmm. It would have still been a loss. So this overwhelming Ohio majority voted November, but if August hadn't turned the way it did, even that would not have been good enough. So that's how important, and this is, I know the justice thing says, this was about November, but it's also about future efforts to end gerrymandering or change the way we do primaries. The types of things that you all are pushing for, almost all of them would have been cut off if this thing had passed in August.
So, I mean, we can say this is a demonstration of citizens in a state really embracing their responsibilities as members of a democratic society, right? So we should be cheered by the willingness of Ohio citizens to do things that they don't normally have to do in a month like August, and that is to be engaged, make their way to the polling place, express their wishes. We hear a lot, though, in a room like this, that it's not just voting. That is a critical piece of a citizen's responsibility. And that citizens should do other things beyond just casting a ballot on a single day to actually exhibit their responsibilities as citizens. And I think that what happened in Ohio also really demonstrated that citizens were not just voting. They were actually organizing to raise people's awareness, to educate the population, to even bring together a bipartisan group of former officials, four different governors, right? To get involved in explaining what the controversy was actually all about. So, yay us. But what happened after that vote? Did the legislature then wake up and think, oh, the citizens of Ohio actually wanted to preserve this power of citizen-led ballots? Or what happened?
Go ahead.
Well, the immediate reaction was from the Senate president, who presides over a gerrymandered Senate, and the Speaker of the House, who presides over a very gerrymandered legislature. Ohio is one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country, with a super majority. And their immediate reaction was, this isn't over. This isn't over. Now, the citizens had spoken both in August and in November, and the first reaction was, this isn't over. We're the legislature. We are going to figure out a way that, in essence, he didn't say this, but in essence is going to weaken what the citizens had just done by constitutional mandate. And I loved when he said that. I said, more, give me more. And I'll tell you why. Because in November of 2024, I'm up to my eyeballs involved in Citizens Not Politicians, which is an effort to end gerrymandering in the state of Ohio. And we're collecting ballots, signatures as we speak, and we have to have 420,000 ballots, valid signatures. That means you got to collect about 700,000 signatures just to be on the safe side. We're going to do that. We've got tremendous backing. We've got momentum. We got momentum from August and momentum from November. And I know people were saying, this reproductive rights, this is what, this all. And I said, yeah, that's important. But what's going to happen in November of 24 is the whole ball game. And that is breaking the back of gerrymandering. And it will happen. Mark my word. You speak to the average citizen and you explain what gerrymandering is. And you explain the unfairness of it. And the impact. Not only for the state of Ohio, but we are talking about gerrymandered congressional districts. The people and the number of, party D and R that represent Ohio and make decisions that affect the nation, based on the majority, the majority of the House. And that's extremely important. We are gerrymandered, in that capacity as well. And that is another focus. So when I say that what's going to happen in November, it will rewrite the rules in the state of Ohio. And I'm really excited about it. You might be able to tell.
So, I've thought about this quite a bit because when I first moved to Ohio in 1995, Ohio would often be referred to as a swing state. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, you wouldn't hear it be described that way. So what happened?
So we've always been this bellwether. And this is why I wrote this book, Laboratories of Autocracy. We are a bellwether. What happens when you have a basically corrupted state house with no accountability, a gerrymandered state house, where you essentially don't have a democracy. In Ohio, you define democracy in all sorts of ways, and it's very hard to define Ohio as a democracy. And so what happens when you have these, she describes some of the leaders, and this is true all over the country, but we have a generation of politicians in Ohio that have never been through elections themselves. They literally have, except for the first primary, they're essentially reappointed their entire careers. And what happens in a system with no accountability is the incentives get all screwed up. You're no longer worried about the general election, which means you're not really worried about the general public. You're worried about the primary, and you're worried about the interests that can get you through that primary, which do not reflect the general election, and often are actually doing the exact opposite of what the general public wants. In fact, sometimes they're taking dollars out of the general public's hands to put it into other hands. And if you're in a world of no accountability, that's the screwed up incentive system you're serving. So what's happened in Ohio, we are a perfect case study of the downward spiral that happens in a world of no accountability. And that world starts with gerrymandering, which is the original sin. In a lot of states, though, there's one other factor that's making these even worse. And it's the fact that, and it reminds you almost of the Jim Crow South. You literally have in 60% of the offices of Oklahoma, 45% in Texas, 50% in Georgia, gerrymandered like Ohio, you have incumbents who don't face any opposition for re-election. So not only is it a long shot race, it's not a race at all. In some states, it's literally categorized as a canceled election. In Texas, it's like 40% are canceled. And so you add all that up, and what you have is this system's truly set aside from the public of these states, wholly disconnected from them, with an incentive system that only drives them to go further in that direction and punishes them if they ever were to. It'll go to Tennessee, where 50% of the Tennessee incumbents unchallenged in November of 22. Anyone in the majority party in Tennessee who let's say they liked their colleagues, the two Justins who they kicked out, and they thought to themselves, well, I like them, I work with them. The problem for them would be, well, if you vote to keep them, you're probably going to lose your next election, your next primary. So we have a set of incentives that literally rewards the worst behavior that's almost the inverse of public service. And that's why Ohio, which the people of Ohio are still 57% pro-choice. They 80 or 90% support common sense gun laws. 90% of gun owners in Ohio support universal background checks. But the legislature is serving an entirely different set of incentives than serving that public. And that's why the state feels like it's going through this thing, and it's because of the heart of these states are state houses. And in the state houses, gerrymandered like Ohio's, which is dozens of them, the set of incentives are turning them into these sort of laboratories of autocracy, which we now see playing out all over the country.
Yeah, so it's very clear that the legislators who were unhappy about the results of those two votes in Ohio did not think that there was a political price for them to pay to be out of step with what their voters in the state wanted. And that is because of structural realities, right? The gerrymandered system in place. Now, Justice O'Connor, when you were on the court, you were concerned about this issue of gerrymandering, and the issue came before the court in Ohio a number of times while you were there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was time to redraw the maps for the state of Ohio in 2022, or for the 2022 election. And 2022 was my last year on the bench. I'd been on the court for 20 years, and I was 12 years as Chief Justice. But Ohio has an age limit. Is 35. And you know, I had to leave. So anyway, it's time with the maps, and the maps are coming, and 7 maps came our way, 2 for Congress and then 5 for the state legislature, all declared gerrymandered, unconstitutional, pursuant to the 2 constitutional provisions that govern this, and that didn't matter because ultimately a 3-panel federal court said to the legislature, well, actually the redistricting commission, which is made up of 7 politicians, 4 of whom are from the legislature, one being the governor, the other being the Secretary of State, and the other being the state auditor. And let me just throw in the mix that the governor's son is on the Supreme Court. So how do you think that went? So anyway, the federal court...
He doesn't recuse himself.
No, he didn't recuse himself. Oh, yeah, that was the point. Anyway, the federal court said to the, this group, the Redistricting Reform Commission, you're going to have to come up with a constitutional map. And if you don't come up with a constitutional map that the Supreme Court is going to say is constitutional by May 31st of 2022, you're going to have to use the 3rd unconstitutional map that you gave the court back in March. Well, what do you think their incentive was to give us a constitutional map? Nothing. So anyway, that's what happened. And in 2022, the unconstitutional map was used for the election of both Congress and the General Assembly in Ohio. They are going to draw another map for 2024's election. And that map was challenged by certain civic groups, and that was just dismissed by the Supreme Court as since all 7 members of the commission voted for it, that's good enough, and that the challenge did not stand. So they're going to use a gerrymandered map in 2024. The good news is, on that election, on that ballot, we will have the constitutional amendment to get rid of gerrymandering. get rid of the politician-populated redistricting commission, instead have a commission of 15 citizens with no connection whatsoever to politics. There's a whole list of people who are forbidden to be on that commission. And it's not a model that has not been tested in, around the country. So, it's a great model. We've just tweaked it for Ohio. So that will take place in November. I have every, faith that it will be successful. That means that they will draw a map in 2025 for the 2026 election, which I fully anticipate will be 100% constitutional. And that map will govern until the next census, and Ohio, receives those numbers. So that's going to be extremely significant. Then once Ohio gets the census numbers, they will do a 10-year map for the 2030s. And that's the way it should be. We should have 10-year maps. We should have predictability. The citizens' interest should be reflected. Communities of interest should be, and the practice of cracking and packing should be a thing of the past.
So this is an extraordinary citizen activity that is leading to these kinds of changes. And Justice O'Connor, you're very much involved in the leadership of that effort, citizens, not politicians. Right. But let me ask about information and misinformation or disinformation as the tool that is being used to confuse voters in the state of Ohio on measures like this, both the measure in August, right, and November, what is coming. So talk a little bit about that problem.
The perfect example of the misinformation that came out in this past November for the reproductive rights, if you looked at the commercials, you would have no idea what the constitutional amendment was going to do. It was ludicrous. There were accusations, for example, that parental control of children would be non-existent, and they could, in essence, have a sex change without their parents' consent. I think they do other things in grade school, but that's what they're, that's the image, and just horrible other, misinformation. And that came, not from AI. That came from the politicians, from the governor on down, misinforming the public. And that mantle was picked up by the religious communities in the state, who had a very large impact and spread that misinformation. It was billed as the most liberal abortion law in the country. It wasn't even close to the, And so, but the good news is that the citizens listened to the truth, and they sought out, the right advice. And there was over 57% of the citizens that voted. And even citizens that said, personally, I don't believe in abortion. Personally, I would never, etc. But I'm not going to tell another person. That's their choice, between their physician, their God, and themselves. And, that's liberty. That's democracy.
If I could add one other layer that I saw in this campaign that I'd never seen before, was the disinformation, and we wrote about this through the blog of the Kettering Foundation. The government itself led the disinformation.
Exactly.
Matt Huffman, the state Senate president, midsummer created a Senate media channel, government funded, that spent the second half of the year putting out all that stuff. It wasn't the campaign commercial. It was the us funding, taxpayer-funded state Senate media channel. Bizarre, right? I mean, stuff you'd see in Hungary happening in Ohio. Well, then the worst of it all, and there was more breaking news on this yesterday, was we have this process called the ballot board. The ballot board is the function of summarizing, I was just talking about this with Carolyn a couple minutes ago, summarizing amendments that may be too long to fit on the ballot. So a set of people is supposed to summarize that language so it can appear small enough that it's an actually logistically possible ballot. Well, our Secretary of State and several politicians wrote a summary that, this is sort of the red flag, that was longer than the amendment. That's sort of red flag number one. Red flag number two is they got so the amendment talked about reproductive freedom, yes, abortion care, but also miscarriage care, fertility, a number of other things. They got rid, in making it longer, they actually got rid of everything referenced except contraception, except for abortion. They got rid of the parts that they knew would actually better capture what this was. This was an amendment to give people a right to make their own decisions for reproductive freedom in a number of ways. And then they, of course, exchanged words such as fetal and fetus with the words unborn child 5 times. Fetal and fetus appeared twice. Unborn child appeared 5 times. That was what the summary that the citizens of Ohio were given to vote on. A complete rewording of it. They mischaracterized the right. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, greenlit this Orwellian manipulation of the ballot. And yesterday, the Secretary of State admitted, because now he's running in a primary, that and it was obvious this is what this was, that he consulted with all the pro-life groups who were opposed to it to rewrite the language. He's trying to now say, see how good I am. So it wasn't just the typical disinformation by a campaign. This was government itself, all the way through from Senate media, bizarre operations to the ballot itself. And polling did show that if you read the amendment itself to a citizen, it did far better than the summary. And that was their goal. The good news is, as the Justice said, people saw through it. I think over the course of the last 6 months, with the first issue one, trying to convince the citizenry to vote against their own voting rights, and then the second one with all that, I think by the end, Ohio citizens said, we don't believe these people anymore. We think this is about our freedom. We're voting yes. And despite all that misinformation, that 57% yes reflects almost exactly what every poll for 2 years has shown us is the citizens' view on a woman's right to choose. They saw through all of it, and they showed up and they voted yes, because in the end, as you said, they figured out what it was about, and they saw the rest of it as disinformation they couldn't trust, even when it was the government itself spewing that disinformation.
And even after the 2 victories, as I said, the proclamations, this isn't over yet. We're going to do something about this. And when I said I was delighted with that, is because that's fodder for campaign commercials for 24, which may show up.
Yeah, exactly. But by the way, one reason they do this is just a little background. The gerrymandering amendments that they ignored over your 7 opinions were the product of 2 constitutional amendment processes in the late teens that passed by 70% each. So there's a history. This happens all over the country. Missouri, the Missouri legislature ignored their gerrymandering reforms. They ignored a Medicaid expansion one. In Florida, we saw what they did to the felony disenfranchisement amendment. These are a group of people in these gerrymandered places that are used to ignoring the general will of their states, and if they need to, ignoring their constitutions. They did it when they rejected your opinions 7 times. And so their instinct after a November election is, well, this is what we always do. We just keep going. And sadly, it often works. And that's why we need a new amendment, because 2 years of defying court orders and the clear voted will of the people of Ohio, they actually succeeded in getting them. They are currently still today. You can tell I get a little fired up about this stuff. Still today, Jim Jordan and Matt Huffman are sitting on maps that we all know by court order violate the Ohio Constitution right now. And they won. They're sitting on those maps now. That's why. And the good thing about the reform is it takes away any role they can play whatsoever in the future, because they've shown that they can't be trusted with any role at all, especially if it's one that requires them to give away a little bit of their own power.
We've had a history with the legislature of missteps. We had a $63 million bribery case where $63 million went to the then Speaker of the House. He's in prison right now. I kid you not. And so too is another one of his aides in that. But some of that money was utilized to, fund campaigns for people who would promise to vote for this utility company measure that was going to increase their fees, their charges. Part of that money went to finance current legislators, that are now, in the legislature enjoying the benefits of gerrymandering. So this is nothing new. We've had a troubled legislature for years.
All right, so we're getting close to the question and answer portion. I want to open it up to the room, but just to summarize, this is the state of democracy. We talk about the health of democracy here. This is a description of the state of democracy in the state of Ohio right now, and we know that it's replicated across the nation. So rightly a concern for citizens in a democratic society here in the United States that requires vigilance on the part of citizens to preserve their rights, which are under attack by people who supposedly represent those voters and who openly lie or mislead those voters about what is really happening. So I think now, having said that, anybody have questions for these two panelists? Yes, over here. Yep. I think there's a mic coming. Okay.
Hello. We're from Wisconsin, so we feel your pain. First of all, I just bought your book, Mr. Pepper. I just ordered it, but I also read the voter file, which is one of his. He writes mystery thrillers about voting, you guys. It's super, super, super scary. Don't let your mom read it. She won't let you go to work. Okay. But so we only have advisory referendums in Wisconsin. And it's very frustrating because sometimes, especially on the local level, people will vote for an advisory referendum and nothing happens and it goes nowhere. Yeah. And they think they voted for something real.
Right.
So my question is, when that does happen, and there are wonderful, well-meaning people who work so hard to get these advisory referendums on the ballot, and then it's nothing, should we still be doing that? But also then, what can we do with that information that makes it worthwhile to continue to do?
So I'm all about so Wisconsin, I think, actually has the worst gerrymander in the nation. You win. We're close, but you're the worst. I have a PowerPoint, and you are the highlight of my PowerPoint. In 2018, across the state of Wisconsin, by 9%, Wisconsin voters chose a Democrat to be in their state house, and that still led to a 2-to-1 majority in their state house Republicans. No joke, that's a system that Vladimir Putin would admire. So my bottom line is, I actually think, although we have to make choice about what we do, anything we can do to make some noise and show the legislatures, but especially the people themselves, that you're not the crazy ones. We're mostly with you. That legislature is the broken place. I think that's generally helpful. I mean, if you told me, well, that's taking away from winning the next Wisconsin Supreme Court race, I'd say, okay, let's prioritize. But I actually think, when I put these in my books, like showing up to these state house hearings. If you're in a gerrymandered district, you often face very little noise about what you're doing. So the more you show up there, the better. If you're doing those referenda, and a lot of the people that are participating are doing it from those very red gerrymandered districts, great. The more you can interrupt they want silence. They want everything to seem like it's business as usual and okay. And so, yeah, if you're putting up things that show actually 70% of Wisconsin do not agree with what you're doing, I think that's in the end a healthy exercise. I just think the more, and this is obviously the work you're all thinking about, the more we can translate all that we're doing into citizen, energy that sends a message, that gets people seeing that they're not, again, they're not the crazy ones. They're actually the majority. I think one of the problems right now in America is that the majority is being bullied into often thinking it's the minority. Gerrymandering is doing that in states where people, I'm pro-choice, but my state, your state actually is by 60-40. Kansas, they just didn't know it. So I think the more we can bring that forward long-term, the better.
And I'd love to see more states incorporate citizen initiative constitutional amendments. It makes no sense not to have that in your constitutions. How that gets generated, you'd probably have to depend on your legislature to do that. But twice and it went nowhere. Yeah. The legislature actually, when, I don't know how many thousands of citizens showed up at the State House and just flooded the State House, that gets their attention. And 10,000 people showing up at your State House, if that can be orchestrated, I would highly recommend it.
One thing I'd caution, though, is these states know that these initiatives are a threat. So somewhere else in America, there's a group of people in a room just figuring out how to make them harder. Missouri right now, they're trying to do what we did in Ohio, and they are trying to add hoops and processes to make it so that citizens also have to go through the legislature, which would kill it. So one of the problems right now, and this is again what I tried to capture in these books, these states aren't on their own, these laboratories of autocracy. There are certain groups and people who love the incentive systems of these states because they turn out to be the perfect places to get a lot of really unpopular, extreme things done. That is why most of the agenda that's way out there isn't showing up at Mitch McConnell's office. It's going to Matt Huffman. It's going to Wisconsin, except you can stop it now. It's going to other states. And so as much as we want to lift democracy, there is another very deep-pocketed group of people out there who are doing, we know who they are, who are doing everything they can. And right now, especially given what just happened in Ohio, they are going to be doing everything in their power to figure out how do we keep citizens from doing what they just did in Ohio and other parts of the country. And we better be prepared for those fights.
Yeah. One more, time for one or two more? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the conversation. Todd Connor, I lead an organization called Veterans for All Voters. We're a military veterans grassroots organization advocating for election reform across the country. Ballot initiatives right now in Idaho, where it's non-binding, Nevada, where we'll have to pass it a second time, Alaska, other places. Here, a comment and then a question. A comment is that the Democrats are not pure on this. Right. And I think it's important to acknowledge as we do this work that it not sort of presented as a partisan frame. I live in Illinois. We have terrible gerrymandered maps, and so the power structure sort of enables itself. I think the Democrats do a better job of masking this as pro-democracy. I say that as a Democrat, but I think that I just want to broaden that conversation because we've identified Republican states. I'm inspired by the power of election reform and structural reforms. I have a comment about our movement, and I want to see how it resonates with you. I fear that when we center this around incentive structures that election systems produce, and we are supporting ranked choice voting and Final Five voting, structural reforms, ending gerrymandering, it gets to the incentive problem, right, that politicians face. There's also sort of a competing narrative, though, that this is about how do we get young people engaged, civic education, civic health, bridging conversations. My view is it's all about the incentive structure, and I feel like we can be gaslighting people if we say you need to learn how to talk across to the other side if, in fact, these structural barriers are so pronounced. And so my argument is young people are making a very rational calculation to disengage. Yeah. They're not uninformed in doing that. They are mindful of the structural impediments to their own participation. If and when we give them a path to really engage, as in Ohio, they will do it. They will do it in droves. And so what's your advice for the movement My argument is center structural reforms, not ignoring bridging and other efforts, but how do you think about the movement, and are there narratives that we need to dial down or dial up to sort of remedy the situation that we're in?
I do think that the youth, they respond to the messenger. More so, I think, than other, segments of the population. Taylor Swift says something, they're there, and I'm not going to say that we need Taylor Swift to become the spokesperson for reform, although why not? But it's important to have someone that they can respect that has credibility with them. It doesn't do me a whole lot of good, you to go into a room of 20-year-olds or, well, I take that back. I gave a lecture at Kenyon College and got a standing ovation. so maybe, you can't engage. But these were excited kids, college kids, politically aware. The college supported them in all of their, and not R's and D's, you have to, or just one. It was across the board. So we talked about institutions becoming institutions that interact with, colleges. I just had a discussion the other night about law schools. Just because you go to law school doesn't mean you're civically engaged. You didn't have any more civics education than, your contemporaries. So we should actually be active in law schools, trying to engage them in civics because, there should be a motivation there because they'll have a megaphone when they graduate. So it's a lot of what was discussed this morning in the last session, networking and messaging, okay, but mindful of the population that you're trying to get to.
If I could add one thing, and I agree on the nonpartisan piece. Obviously, I come to this having been a chair of one party, but I actually think the reason we succeeded in Ohio in August and November was because we were multi-partisan and really, in the end, nonpartisan. And you saw that in who was speaking out, and you saw it in the votes, which was even more impressive. And I think one problem that's viewed as only partisan is a whole lot of institutions will stay away that we needed to fight. I'm a big believer, we've talked about this, that every university, every food bank, every homeless shelter should be registering everybody who walks in their doors. That it should be part of their mission. And if we did that, we would scale up participation in a huge way. Those are often going to be the better messengers about why you should get involved than the Democratic volunteer knocking on the door. So I think being nonpartisan in so much of this work is really critical. On the messaging, I think, we were just talking about this before the session. A lot of young people, democracy doesn't seem to be playing out too well for them. So if we come at them only about, hey, you're for democracy, let's go vote, they'll say, well, look at my student debt situation. Look at the crazy politics of Washington. Every politician seems terrible to me. We're not winning them with that 30,000-foot conversation. And so I think, why have we been successful? And but one good thing, there's a real winning streak for democracy at the state level in this country going back a year and a half. And I think one reason is because the Dobbs decision made it clear it's not just about democracy, but the subversion of democracy has a direct impact on your life. And I think the more you can connect the 30,000-foot democracy conversation to the real impact on the reason that there's an attack on democracy is to impose on all of us a view and policies of the world that we don't agree with, that undermine our schools, that would bring crazy politics to school boards that we've never seen before, that mean we don't have our own reproductive freedom. I think the more, and if you look at Secretary of State races all around the country in November of 22, where election deniers lost, the winning candidates often connected Dobbs and freedom to vote together. And so I think connecting it to real world issues that people are thinking about every single day and connecting that to the democracy argument is a much better 1-2 punch than all of us trying to convince folks who've generally not seen the best side of democracy in their lifetimes. All they've ever known is the president whose citizenship was questioned because of the color of his skin. Then they saw the last 10 years, it's been crazy. So we've got to come to them with the issues that they care about, as well as the broader sort of overlay of democracy and all those issues.
So we only have a couple more minutes, and there's a hard stop. Justice O'Connor has to run to the airport.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. So anybody have a quick question? Daniel?
Sure. Daniel stayed with Lyceum Labs. One is I wish you Godspeed with this effort to combat gerrymandering in Ohio. That would be a win for democracy. I want to play devil's advocate here, and I do so with respect, which is the premise of the discussion thus far is the problem facing democracy in Ohio is the procedural obstacles that need to be reformed. And that's a reasonable theory of change. An alternative theory of change is that the Democratic Party, which I'll stipulate that you're right that your opponents in Ohio are representing the authoritarian interest, that the Democratic Party would need to find a way to win back the rural and working class voters that it has lost. And I just did a quick check here. Donald Trump won by 8 points in 2016 and 2020. J.D. Vance, I thought Tim Ryan was a terrific candidate. J.D. Vance won by 6 points in 2022. Your governor won by 25 points. So what can be done, and can you succeed in checking the authoritarian interest until you win back those voters?
Well, let me say this, because I actually, this is going more partisan than I think we should. I actually think if you ungerrymandered Ohio,
Right.
you'd have a Republican legislature. It's a lean Republican state.
Right.
We are a little bit red. I'm a Democratic chair, I can acknowledge it. A really good candidate like Sherrod Brown can win. He's still winning the votes you talked about. But what would we have if we ungerrymandered Ohio? If they really went crazy, maybe we'd win the state house, which happened in 2008. But for the most part, what we'd get is probably a mid-50s, mid-40s state house. It would be Republican. That would reflect the voters of Ohio, but it would behave differently than a gerrymandered state house. So to me, my goal is not, although, you know, on the Democratic side, which I'm not wearing that hat today, do I want to win every election? Of course I did when I was chair. But the goal of ending gerrymandering, and by the way, I won 3 elections that gave Chief Justice O'Connor some really good partners to end gerrymandering. So we won some even in some tough years. But ending gerrymandering may not lead to a Republican legislature. A Democratic legislature, it probably won't. But it will lead to a different legislature, a legislature that will reflect what we just saw in the voting, that would never vote for that special election in August, and that once the voters spoke, would stand up like any normal politician would and say, the voters spoke. It's time to move forward. So what I want is just a better system, and in the end, you let the chips fall where they may after that.
Yeah, you'd have... You would have competitive districts in Ohio, which is what is missing, everybody knows, when they're gerrymandered. You don't have competitive districts, which means the extremists, the political extremists in both parties, you know, win. If we had competitive districts, it'd be more centrist. And we would have not a supermajority in the legislature, which really strips away a tremendous amount of power from the legislature, from the the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, if there's no supermajority, and it restores a balance, between the 3 branches of government. And on that note, I've got to leave. So thank you very much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice.
Thanks, everybody.